Hey everybody, Sayre Nova Motorcycles again. So this week we have a pretty special machine, but before we get to it, I want to set the territory a little bit. 1969, which is way before my time. Sorry, Grandpa, but so that was basically the beginning of the superbike era. That's when bikes started to get big. They started to get fast. The race was on for manufacturers to outdo each other, and basically, superbike was a bike that could easily break 100 miles an hour, whereas previous to that, hitting the ton of 100 miles an hour was a feat in itself. These bikes could just do it without breaking a sweat. 1969, 68, 69 saw the BSA Triumph 3-cylinder 750 triples come out, which were briefly the fastest production bikes in the world. It saw the Honda 754 come out, which was arguably the biggest change in the industry that happened in 50 years. It saw the Norton Commando come out, which allowed the Commando, the Brits, to also the Norton to enter the superbike world. And it saw this machine come out, which is one of the coolest and most pointless machines that was ever built. It's the Kawasaki H1 500cc triple. It's a 3-cylinder, 2-stroke, puts out about 60 horsepower, weighs a little over 350 pounds, and was the fastest production bike of its time. It was only dethroned later on by the 900cc, also Kawasaki Z1, almost double the displacement, 4-stroke. That became the muscle bike of its time. And then that was only dethroned a few years later by the Laverda Jota, which was actually one of the coolest super bikes of the era. But that's a whole nother thing. We don't get to see many of those. This particular machine, if you'll see, has 41.9 miles on the odometer. I felt bad just pushing it out here. I put like a 10th of a mile or a 20th of a mile. I saw it moving and I felt like I was doing grievous harm just by pushing it from the garage out front. And this is a true barn find. It has sat like this, according to the owner. It has sat like this since his father bought it new. He basically rode it around the block a few times. It was last registered in 1973 that we can tell. And it's basically unmolested. You don't see many of these. It almost feels like it's too nice to ride. It almost feels like it's too good to do anything with, and this should belong in a museum. But that kind of goes against everything that we believe about motorcycles, and the owner agrees. He wants us to get it running, get it safe to ride, as safe as a Kawasaki H1 can be. That's a definite term you use in quotes with this thing. And he's going to have some fun with it. These were affectionately and scarily known as the Widowmakers. Believe it or not, the Kawasaki, a couple years after the 500, they made a 750 version of these. Also insane, and those really got the name the Widowmakers, but they both qualify. Basically, they're really powerful engines in these spindly, willowy frames with brakes that overheat easily. They get real weird as soon as you try to ride them fast. But what they do in a straight line is pretty much amazing. And it was basically Kawasaki trying to launch themselves to the top of the industry in the American market. The reason why bikes were trying to get so fast is that the Americans had taken over as basically the dominant market in the world. And we ride on straight roads. We don't have the need for small little bikes, the same as other smaller countries do. People and also the dominant form of competition here is things like drag racing, where 0 to 60 is more important than your absolute top speed. So Kawasaki said, we're gonna make a splash, and they made this, and boy, did it ever. This thing, being a 3-cylinder, when it gets on the pipe, it just howls, and it sounds amazing. It scares you. It'll lift the wheel in, first, second, third gear, no problem. It's just, you gotta have you gotta have some guts to ride this thing. It's hard to know what to say about it. We did a restoration on one a few years ago. Same one. This is a 1971, by the way, not a 69. A couple years later. We did a restoration of this exact same year, and I had some really fun riding it. Every time I ride it, I'm like, this is such an amazing machine, and I have no idea what I would do with it. You don't want to tour on it. They get about 20 miles per gallon, which is ridiculous. The 2-strokes are notoriously bad consumers of fuel, and this being in piston port, really early design 2-stroke with no expansion chambers, they just puke out a ton of unburnt fuel, environmentally horrible. You can't go more than 100 miles without stopping at a gas station. You can't really ride them fast through the twisties without getting very exciting in the worst possible ways. But they do what they do just like nothing else. You get on the pipe and the front wheel lifts off a little bit, and it's nothing but a smile across your face. So they're amazing. People who love them, and they really They're really just one of a kind. We don't see a lot of them because a lot of them didn't make it. They're actually becoming quite collectible too. So a lot of them are snatched up and just put away in offices and living rooms and museums and stuff. So it's really cool to see someone who has such a nice bike like this and wants to ride it. Going back to the emissions of a two-stroke, what did kill these off was the EPA, rightfully coming in and saying we can't have all our machines just spewing out unburnt hydrocarbons. Two-strokes at that point could not be made cleaner, so the switch, all the manufacturers who had been investing in two-strokes, they moved to four-strokes, and the rest is history. We've had the universal Japanese four-cylinder motorcycle ever since. This was a nice, it was before the UJM became a thing. It was a nice alternative to it for a long time until I think 75 was the last year. 76 might have been the last year of the 750. I might be getting that confused with the Suzuki GT 750, also a three-cylinder two-stroke. But mid-70s, they were gone. But for a while, they offered a nice alternative to the inline four, which was the GS 750, the Honda 750, CB 750, the Kawasaki KZs, and later on the Yamaha XS 750 triple, which was kind of cool, and then the XS 1100 fours. They all had so much in common that they weren't that interesting. This is a really interesting machine, and what more do you want? The only interesting point I want to make is Kawasaki's big bike before this was an exact copy built under license of a BSA A10, which is just kind of cool. The history of the industry is the newer companies getting into motorcycles. Kawasaki was heavy industry. They were making, boats and railway cars and, airplanes and stuff like that. As they got into motorcycles, they just took what was already there. So they took a BSA A10, copied it, made it called the Kawasaki W1, W2, and then that became the genesis of their retro bike. So if you've been around for a little bit, in the early 2000s, they had a W650, which was a throwback to their copy of a BSA A10. I love that kind of synchronicity in the world, the way that the industry communicates with itself. Honda did the same thing. Honda borrowed some Mondial motors when they were first getting started, built their bikes based on designs they got from them. And then, 10, 15 years later, when they were big, you saw Benelli coming in and stealing Honda's designs and basically making copies of Honda machines. It's kind of cool. I love to see that kind of stuff. But anyway, this was Kawasaki's big splash, and it worked. So stay tuned. We'll have some video of it running when we get it going. And as usual, please like and subscribe.